Well, good morning. It's good to have you back at Ancient Paths Bible Study. My name is Kevin Young, and I have the privilege of serving at Christ Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, you can visit that URL right up there at the top corner of the screen, www.christstable.today. If you'd like to find out more about this study, as we are working through 6 ancient practices from the early church, how they utilized resources, I wouldn't say in replacement of or in addition to the Bible. They didn't actually have the Bible for the first 300 years or so of the church. They had pieces and parts, but it hadn't been brought together yet, and just wasn't the same. So they had to use other things in order to transform themselves spiritually, in order to teach new followers of the way. And so they utilized spiritual practices, and we're walking through 6 of them in this study, and you can find out more about that study right there at that URL, go.christstable.today/ancientpaths. There you're going to find a PDF version of this curriculum guide that we've sent out to everybody who's a regular donor to Christ Table, but we try to provide as many resources for free as possible. We're not here to make money, but we do need to continue to support ourselves. So we would love it if you would consider supporting us. You can do it right over there at that URL, christstable.today. Sign up for our email list. But also, we love it if you just are around for the study and are a part of our community that way. Not a problem. But speaking of that, if you would like to get in on the next study, which is coming up in just a few weeks, this is the last week of Ancient Paths. We're starting a new one here at the very end of May. You can get in on that at christstable.today at that website. All you need to do is become a donor to Christ Table, and we send all of these resources absolutely free in the mail to you in thanks for your donation to Christ Table. This book is going to be great. The Bible study is great. The book, there's a hint as to what the topic is in that graphic right there on the box. We have some other things that we will include in there as well. And so we'd love to send this to you, and you can be a part of it, like I said, by simply going to christstable.today and becoming a donor, and make sure to sign up for the email list there no matter what you do. Well, why don't we just go ahead and jump into today's study. We have come through 5 spiritual practices and invite you to go back and look at all of those. But this week, we're looking at the 6th and the final one, catechism, which I know can dredge up some pretty negative memories for those who have been through parochial school, maybe, and also even for those of us, who watch movies and all. It's never usually presented in a positive light. But I have to tell you that this is one of the primary tools that the early church used and has continued to use throughout the history of the church in order to help baptize people into a knowledge of the faith. Now, obviously, we know that head knowledge is not the most important part of the faith, but it is an important part of the faith among several. And so what is catechism? Well, catechism is simply a statement of belief. It's actually lots of statements of beliefs, usually lots of sentences that either kind of are driving towards a certain point or are categorized around certain topics. And oftentimes, especially today, as we learn more and more about childhood development, catechisms are tailored to the age of the individual. And so it may well be that one of the best things that you could do as a parent or as a grandparent is to work alongside your kids or your grandkids in order to develop a catechism for your own family, for them. What are the most important things to know about the Christian faith? What are the most important things to know about God or about Jesus? And develop this in an age-appropriate manner. Why? Well, it's simply there to help echo the core teachings of the faith community in a meaningful, digestible, memorable way. You can hand somebody a Bible and say, here, read this. Or you could hand somebody a distillation of the most important parts of that and utilize that, which is what the early church did. They compiled the most important things that you needed to know, and then they taught those. They helped indoctrinate, which is not a negative word. As we talked about yesterday, we're all being indoctrinated by something all of the time. We're all being catechized by something all the time. We're all being baptized into rhythms and knowledge all the time. We are sponges, even at my age. The question is, what are we being baptized into? What are we being indoctrinated into? What are we being catechized into? And my contention is, and the early church reflected this, that we should be intentional about what we allow ourselves to be indoctrinated by. So today we're going to find ourselves in Acts chapter 18, verses 24 through 28. And we're kind of jumping into the story. Yesterday we talked about Luke and how he wrote this 2-volume set, the Gospel of Luke, and then the Acts of the Apostles. One is primarily focused on Jesus and his life, and then the next one is primarily focused on the church post-ascension of Jesus. And so we're going to kind of jump back into Dr. Luke's writings, but we're going to jump in Acts chapter 18 as we find this interesting story with a few characters where catechesis, where teaching is going to be central. And we see that through most of the book of Acts, how teaching is central to what happens there. And it really is the reason why the church exploded, was because they did such a good job of teaching and training and educating and help walking people through these steps and these stages of their faith from beginning to spiritual maturity. Sadly, a lot of churches today don't do as well at that. Everything is kind of around Sunday worship, which I don't want to denigrate Sunday worship. I just want to say that our teaching and training and mentoring of people should be equal or above the amount of time and attention and energy that we put into Sunday mornings, or else we're probably not creating spiritually mature individuals. You can't eat once a week for an hour and expect to be healthy. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Luke chapter 18, verse 24. Before I go any further down this rabbit trail. Meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, who was an eloquent speaker who knew the scriptures well, had arrived in Ephesus from Alexandria in Egypt. Now, what we know about Alexandria is Alexandria was far and away kind of the center of the universe when it came to academia and to knowledge and to wisdom. The library at Alexandria is storied in history in a positive way around knowledge. And so Apollos, who we should not be surprised is an eloquent speaker coming from a very deeply academic area, Alexandria in Virginia, arrives in Ephesus. We find out that he is a Jew, and there's a very large Jewish contingent in northern Africa, which is where Alexandria is, and he knew the scriptures well. Now, I need to point out here that any time that the New Testament says scriptures, they're not speaking about the Bible as we know it. Remember, it's not going to come into existence for 300 years. Anytime that they use the word the scriptures, they're not speaking about any of the Gospels. They're not speaking about any of Paul's letters. Paul's letters mostly aren't written, even by this point. They're speaking about the Hebrew text, what we Christians would term the Old Testament, but which I kind of prefer to call the Hebrew text. It's not old. It's not been wiped away. It's still here. It's still among us. And it's also rude to Jewish people. Sometimes you can't get around it. But the Hebrew text, whenever you see the scriptures, like written, the scriptures, capital S, in the New Testament, they're speaking about the Hebrew text, our Old Testament. So he knew them well. And he had been taught the way of the Lord, and he taught others about Jesus with an enthusiastic spirit and with accuracy. However, he only knew about John's baptism. So what we're seeing here is that he had been taught. Well, he hadn't been taught out of the New Testament, right? Because it doesn't exist yet by this point. So he's been taught the scriptures, but then he has also been taught these other pieces of material about how the New Testament, about how the Old Testament has been fulfilled or is being fulfilled. And he knew about John's baptism, which means that he knew about Jesus, right? Because Jesus baptized John, but he only had half the story. He only had pieces of the story of Jesus. We find this, right, in culture all the time. People only have pieces of the story of Jesus. And usually the pieces that they have been taken from from places and people who should not be giving pieces of the story of Jesus because they don't know it well themselves. That's why I've said we've done a really terrible job of baptizing people into the knowledge of the faith. The things that they know about their faith sometimes can be dangerous to them, can be harmful. It's not the full truth. It's only half the truth. And so the early church, and we're going to see this here, did a really good job at making sure that that didn't happen, of making sure that they understood what the main thing was and that they kept the main thing, and allowed secondary things to be secondary things at best. We don't do that much today. We're far too consumed about, I don't want to minimize it, but LGBTQ and grooming and gay marriage and pro-life and abortion and all of these things are super important, but they are not primary to our faith. The treatment of other human beings is important to our faith and may be considered primary, but when compared to Jesus, when compared to God, when compared to the mission, when compared to the redemption of the world that Jesus came to bring, when compared to the work of the life of Jesus and on the cross, it's kind of like Sunday mornings. It's not like those other things need to be denigrated, but it's that the other things, Jesus, God, redemption of the world, all of those things, they need to be elevated higher than they are. This is what the early church did well. So Apollos has an enthusiastic spirit, but he doesn't have the full picture or the full story. So when Priscilla and Aquila heard him preaching boldly in the synagogue, that didn't keep him from preaching. Boy, I could give a whole sermon today about people who only have half the story or have it wrong, it not keeping them from preaching. In fact, most of the people that you hear preaching on social media, on television, even in some churches about faith, we'll just say they may well be in Apollo's shoes here in their understanding. So Priscilla and Aquila, look how they do this. They don't publicly rebuke him. Fascinating. They take him aside and they explained the way of God even more accurately. I love the way that that's framed. It wasn't a, you're wrong. It was a, hey buddy, come here, let's talk about this. And then they explain the way of God just a bit more accurately. Not you're wrong, but hey, let us help you be a bit more accurate. Other thing that I want to point out here, just because we're here and I never miss an opportunity to do this, Priscilla's name is listed first. Priscilla is the wife, Aquila is the husband. That means something, especially in a patriarchal society where the order of names, and you'll see this throughout both testaments of the Bible, the order of names is important, and it is always prioritized intentionally because it communicated respect and value and importance and honor. And it was a social taboo to get the order of names wrong. Men's names were always listed first. Firstborns were always listed first in the order of birth. Women always listed last. Not always, and especially not in the Bible. Are there moments where it happens? Yes, but this isn't a rarity here with Priscilla being listed first. It elevates her above her husband, who were both knowledgeable of the Bible. All of this crap about women being secondary to men when it comes to preaching and teaching is a misreading of Paul in the scripture, period. People out there like Apollos only having half the story and not teaching accurately, this is them. So Priscilla listed first, but also she's teaching. She is the one, because she is listed first, who is the primary person who took Apollos aside and explained the way of God, who taught the man even more accurately. Don't come at me. Don't come at me with this pro-men Women need to be in their place in the church. You're wrong. So Apollos had been thinking about going to Achaia, been thinking about going to here, and the brothers and sisters in Ephesus, they actually said, yeah, go. This guy's great. He knows some. Now he knows things more accurately. So they wrote to the believers there and they asked them to welcome Apollos. And when he arrived there, he proved them right. He proved to be of great benefit to those who by God's grace had believed. He refuted the Jews with powerful arguments in public debate. Now I want to pause here again and say that what Apollos is doing by refuting the Jews with powerful arguments in public debate, this is not like we see on social media. This is not like we see people on street corners shouting out with their bullhorn and their Bible open. This is not people who are being intentionally confrontational in spaces where confrontation is unusual. This isn't being an ass for Jesus. It's not being a jerk for Jesus. No. In those days, remember, we have this whole Greek idea of education and philosophy and of rhetoric and of debate. And Rome was also very much woven into those things. This whole Greco-Roman idea of dialogue. This is what we're seeing here, is that there were forums and opportunities for people to come together in public places and debate ideas. This idea, you're on the debate team. Well, this is going back to these days where this was not just something that you did in high school as a part of a club, but something that people would do. It was entertainment. It was education. And so this is what's happening here. Apollos is going to these places and to these forums where public debate was happening on different topics, and he was powerfully arguing. Why? Because he was powerfully taught the things that he didn't know about the faith in which he had already given himself to. I would say that again if I can remember what I said. Just rewind just a little bit. Just take that little scrub thing and then scrub it back. Using the scriptures, he explained to them that Jesus was the Messiah. What we are seeing here is catechism in action. They didn't have the Bible. They had the scriptures, the Hebrew text, what we would call the Old Testament, in order to help Apollos, but Apollos already knew those things. He was very educated in that. And a little bit of the story of the New Testament with John the Baptist and Jesus, but they didn't have the New Testament. So the way that they taught and indoctrinated and catechized people was through these core statements. And once we have the Bible, then those core statements come more out of the Bible than they do out of the practices of the church. But I'll tell you that much of what is in the Bible and what was written down came out of these catechisms, and much of what was in the catechisms was then informed by the Bible once it continued to kind of become compiled. And so this is catechism in action here, using the scriptures, the Hebrew text. He explained to them how Jesus was the Messiah, and he was able to do that because he now had a framework for what of that was important and what matched up with the story of Jesus. And so here's where I want to end today. I've talked a lot, very little about what I was supposed to talk about. This is normal. What I want to end on today is this idea: how do we kind of take this for us? And I'll be interested in your journaling and your questions today in the curriculum, what you come up with. But here's one that's kind of compelling to me right now. What is critical that we know about Jesus? If somebody came to you and said, tell me in a few sentences, give me a few bullet points, what do I need to know about Jesus? What was important to him? Or if you see somebody out on social media saying a whole bunch of things about truth, about Jesus, about what's important and what Christians should be doing, and it just doesn't feel right, would you be able to say, no, this isn't what Jesus taught or thought, this isn't what he cared about or encouraged us to care about? Would you be able to say what things he did teach and think? Would you be able to say these are the things that were important to him and know it conclusively, be able to kind of back it up reasonably? This is the work of developing a short catechism, a short list of statements of belief, and I think that it may well come in handy and be important for you. It certainly would be helpful for us to be able to know those things and then to be able to pass them on. And I think that if you're being aware, that you will recognize that these opportunities maybe come up a lot more than you may at first think that they do. So what is critical that we know about Jesus? And I'm going to say to you, if you're the one developing the catechism, have at it. Not what somebody else thinks, but what do you think is critical that we know about Jesus? And it may well be that in order to answer that question, you just need to know more about Jesus. Well, that's not a problem, right? Until tomorrow.